Hello, I'm Holly Hennessy. I'm a principal analyst at Omdia covering IoT cybersecurity. And today I'm joined by Dan Cartmill from TX1 Networks for this chat on OT cybersecurity. Dan, do you want to quickly introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Ollie. So I'm Dan Cartmill, the Senior Director of Global Product Marketing at TX1. So I look after all things messaging and how do we describe the problems that exist in the market and how our products can help solve those problems for customers.
Awesome. So to kind of kick off the discussion, I think this is a question that's often spoken about in these types of chats. But would it be an OT cybersecurity conversation if we didn't somehow relate it to IT security in a way? So I think first off, what really makes the two different, and why do you think kind of it's really important to focus on that distinction for organizations, and why is that important to understand?
The basics get talked about all the time. So it's the difference between availability and confidentiality, that triad flipped on its head. That's a big part of it, but there's so much more that goes into what makes it different. And it's these nuanced parts that are the important parts of it, though. So an easy example is the much longer life cycle of the systems and devices that are in these environments. That means that the overall approach to security has to be different. It has to be adapted. The inability to use the normal ways of approaching a security problem may not be applicable. They may not be able to be used inside of the industrial environment. So you have to look at, how are we approaching security? Is this still the correct way? And then implement a long-term strategy and plans that work across the IT security requirements and OT, which is, of course, best done by making sure that there's good collaboration between teams.
I think it's really interesting to think about the business when looking at operational technology. And as you mentioned, the devices are obviously a large part of that. They're often really crucial to the business goals within the organization as well. So thinking about those kind of devices outlasting, the life cycle and the security of their operating systems, they can also be really costly to update. They can be really disruptive. And then it kind of begs the question on, do they need to be updated? Are they performing the intended function? So, for a lot of organizations, it's kind of, don't fix what isn't broken kind of mentality.
Absolutely. And from a business standpoint, it probably doesn't make a lot of sense to do that. It's probably not in the business's best interest in a lot of cases to go ahead and do ginormous capital projects to replace large pieces of plant and equipment. It can't be done at the drop of a hat. It takes years of planning to effectively do that. So to have a security mandate suddenly come in and say all of these particular devices, whilst they may be working just fine, they are running a legacy or an older operating system that doesn't have support anymore. Therefore, you have to remove it. It might initially feel like, okay, well, we're just talking about maybe a few $1,000s to replace some individual terminals. But the reality is that could be a multi-million-dollar proposition you're putting forward there to replace significant parts of plant and equipment that are capital expenses as well, which have a completely different budgeting situation and that have to be done years in advance. So there has to be a compromise, and different controls need to be considered on how to effectively manage the risk that exists there.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's an interesting way of looking at it as well. It's kind of like, how can you be a bit more creative? In some scenarios, best case scenario, if you had unlimited money, you have brand new equipment that's secure by design and all of that kind of thing. But again, I think when you're thinking about the problem statement there, it's kind of, you might even then have a new device which has better security. But then that problem is kind of cyclical. In the future, you're just going to have that same issue again, which kind of comes back to your idea of, having those long-term management of these devices and bearing in mind that this is, a problem of OT environments that needs to be tackled. So how would you say that organizations can kind of best plan for that long-term management of these types of devices?
Yeah, so it all starts in information, in education, in learning that the reality of the industrial plants, the OT environments themselves, is very different. It's not that 3 to 5, maybe 7 if you run a real long replacement cycle. That simply doesn't exist. So the devices being purchased now could exist in that place for decades. And that in itself isn't a bad thing. So it's a part of that, though, is the mindset shift that it's okay for us to carry more risk. And how that is justified is, what do we do to mitigate that? What do we do to allow us to carry that higher risk of perhaps an out of support operating system on a particular device, or a vulnerable system that can't be removed? How do we make sure that we put the controls in place so we can comfortably do that? Because often the case will be, and certainly in short-term situations, it can't be replaced. So the best way to start this is to work with the OT teams, work together, start that collaboration, open that discussion, understand what you're working with. And then with that information, don't take a black and white approach to it. Understand that there is going to have to be compromise, and it's about finding appropriate and good solutions that can mitigate that risk so you can operate within your tolerances of the organization's risk management profile safely.
Yeah, for sure. I think it is definitely how organizations can kind of set themselves apart when it comes to effective risk management. I think the key there is kind of effective, right? So it's being able to make sure that what you're actually doing is the best for your organization. And I think, yeah, as you mentioned, kind of working with the OT teams, working with the IT teams, making sure there is that effective collaboration kind of gets to a point where you are making those effective decisions. You're kind of involving everybody who needs to give their expertise and their knowledge in order to make it tailored to your organization as well.
Absolutely. I mean, I've seen examples of organizations where the IT security team, with all the best intentions, have developed a new plan for implementing security inside of the OT environment. They got direction that they had to start doing that. They developed what would be an excellent plan, but they took it down to the plant to begin implementing, and they got told to hit the bricks. They were not going to put that in because the cost of putting it in, the interruption that it would have caused, was just too high for the organization to accept. It wasn't that they were outwardly trying to do that. It was just a lack of knowledge. But then when the team started working together, they were able to solve that. And then now got some excellent cybersecurity in place in their operations. They're a great model, in fact, in the automotive industry. But it is that working together to build up that common knowledge base. It's just so critically important. So in terms of developing a strategy and looking at the short-term fixes versus long-term ways to effectively manage it, because you can't remove it, you can only manage it. It is what technologies can be put in place to protect the most critical assets and systems to the bottom line of the organization, really, the highest priority. How do we put something in place that can provide immediate protection when we can't do anything else? So that might be network virtual patching is an easy example to think about there. So that can be put in place. It means you don't have to touch the device itself. The longer term part that would accompany that, though, is that piece of equipment is going to have some kind of maintenance period at some point in time. You need to make sure that when that maintenance period comes up, it is on the list of tasks to be done to apply patches, to do various upgrades, do different security things, so it doesn't rely exclusively on the short term. So that Band-Aid can be removed, or it isn't the only control protecting it. And that's how it becomes that kind of longer term view of, okay, well, let's do something now to remove the immediate risk, but make sure that we continue to track that so we can better mitigate that risk in the future and more sustainably manage that in the future. And then taking that more broadly across the organization. So you don't just have one particular device that needs this kind of action. Of course, the entire organization will. Taking that same approach and tackling it one at a time. It's important to start. So start with the highest priority, but then keep working on that until you finally cover everything, rather than waiting until things have gone pear-shaped and suddenly you're trying to put out fires. You'll only end up behind even further, and that situation really just perpetuates itself then. You end up only being able to fight fires, and you can never be strategic.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think as well, in thinking about these environments, one of the things that, we hear from our research is this kind of struggle that OT organizations in particular have with kind of resourcing and skills and things like this. And, being in that kind of firefighting scenario just kind of exacerbates that issue. So, it's as you said, it's a kind of sustainable strategy. It's also going to be better in the long run in terms of alleviating some of those challenges for sure. And one of the things I think is, we can touch on in this conversation is around that risk management you've mentioned. So how do you kind of find that organizations can, balance the requirements that they need?
Yeah, so certainly one thing that I see a lot of in cybersecurity generally, where we sometimes run a bit fast and loose with terms like risk management and threats and things like that, and then maybe overhype them a little more than is required. When it comes to certainly the industrial environment, they have very robust risk management procedures in place already. A lot of them, they've got huge regulatory frameworks around them that require that to be done as a priority task, the number one priority task, things like safety, for example. Right? That is a exercise in risk management. Cybersecurity is no different from that. So it's not about bringing this brand new concept in and starting from scratch. It is looking at, and again, it's collaboration. It's about understanding what already exists, what is being covered already. It's not always the case that because that additional threat vector has been added, that system has zero protection now. It had a whole level of protection before that new vector emerged. It's about finding what is that difference and applying the risk management processes to that particular part. So that greatly reduces the amount of work that actually needs to be done. And it also leverages the work that's already been done. So you're not duplicating your effort, and you end up, you don't have conflicts between the different pieces of work happening.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's interesting as well, moving away from that mindset, as you mentioned, the zero risk kind of removing all risk kind of goal. And I think we've kind of touched on, how perhaps that might not be the best way to do things. You want to be able to do things effectively. How do you kind of suggest organizations do move away from that mindset? What are the kind of things that are going to help that cultural shift or, get to a better point when it comes to effective risk management?
Yeah, this is a particularly hard one for a lot of security practitioners. And I still think about it all the time as a former practitioner, that ideally we would want to have no risk, be able to avoid everything. And when we're completing our various tasks and deciding on solutions and implementing them and whatnot, that is the kind of thought process, the natural thought process that we take. To change that is really to go against what seems like the right thing to do. So that's to say that I understand that it's difficult to do, but what needs to happen is you need to become comfortable operating in an environment with risk. So it's a mindset shift more so than changing practices, to become comfortable where you can carry risk knowingly within particular systems, particular domains, knowing that appropriate controls have been put in place, and that whilst not perfect, it is still a solution that makes the best sense for the business as a whole. So at the end of the day, of course, all of this is being done in service to the business and its higher level goals.